Today, we welcome to Global Citizenship Education interview series, Saumen Marginson. Saumen Marginson is Professor of Higher Education at the University of Oxford. He formerly worked at Monash and Melbourne universities in Australia and at the UCL Institute of Education in London. He's also director of the Center for Global Higher Education and joint editor-in-chief of the journal Higher Education Springer. The Center for Global Higher Education is a research partnership of 6 UK and 5 international universities, which is founded to conduct research projects on global, national, and local aspects of higher education in 2015 and 2023. Saumen focuses on global, international, and comparative aspects of higher education, global science, higher education in East Asia, and higher education and social inequality. Saumen was the Clark Kerr Lecturer on Higher Education at the University of California in 2014. He is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK, fellow of the Society for Research into Higher Education, and a member of the Academia Europaea. His recent books are Changing Higher Education for a Changing World, edited with Claire Callender and William Locke in Bloomsbury, Changing Higher Education in India, edited with Saumen Chattopadhyay and Varghese, Bloomsbury, and Changing Higher Education in East Asia, edited with Xin Xu, also in Bloomsbury. So, Saumen, it's a pleasure to welcome you here to Global Citizenship Education interview series. Thank you for being here. It's an honor.
Thanks, Emiliano, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me begin by saying that as I was preparing for this conversation, I want to congratulate you because going through the website of your Center for Global Higher Education, I discovered that you are one of the world's top scientists, at least according to Elsevier and Scopus at the Stanford University survey based on citation in 2020. So this is great, and it honors the important work you're doing.
I think it's just numbers driven, Emiliano. It's just the number of publications and the number of citations drive those figures. It's
right.
It's not an assessment by peers or by the world's
right.
people who say so and so is a good person and we like them. It's just counting up the number of times that publications have mentioned other publications. And I happen to have produced a lot of papers. It's been characteristic of my work, as some others. You know, some put out a small number of very good papers, and others put out a large number of papers, which we hope will include some very good ones.
Right. Okay. But I strongly believe it honors the important work you're doing. And in fact, today, I'd like to discuss with you, let's say, super complex concepts. And so these are very important concepts. We will discuss global citizenship, globalization, but also your journey as an educator and your recent publications. But I'd like to begin our conversation with a straightforward question. And the question is, what is global citizenship and what is a global citizen based on your research work, experiences in teaching across several geographical areas worldwide?
You know, the concept of global citizenship is a very attractive idea, I think. You know, the idea that we're all committed to something in common and that we're all members of that. And I think many of us would deeply endorse that principle. The complication comes when you put the word global and the word citizenship together. I mean, to me, global means the world as a whole, you know, looking at the world as a whole, and the relationships, the institutions, the values, the practices which hold the world together or bring it closer together. Globalization is the process of bringing the world closer together, convergence and integration. And citizenship usually means you're the members of a bounded polity or a society, a national society. So there is no global government and there is no world country, if you like, in the same sense that we have nation states. So the idea of citizenship in the formal political sense doesn't apply. But what I think citizenship signifies when we attach it to the word global is this idea of a commitment, you know, to the world as a whole and to understanding the world as interdependent, that what we all do affects everyone else, and that our fate, if you like, hangs together. And I think the global ecology, the global climate probably illustrates that more strongly than anything else.
Yeah. And when it comes, this is a very interesting analysis. When it comes to educating the so-called global citizens, as you know, global citizenship can be approached from different and diverse theoretical perspectives. There is a little bit a more neoliberal approach oriented toward the so-called global market, but there is also a more critical, transformative approach, perhaps supported by the UNESCO and other entities and several scholars. So within this diversity of understanding of how to educate the global citizen, what is your understanding, and how would you describe educating the global citizen? What is a global citizen in this context?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that many of us have been critical of the neoliberal version of the world and of our own lives, of our own societies, and of the world as a whole. The feeling that it's too narrow, that it just focuses on economic value, not on human value or cultural value. It doesn't acknowledge the depth of human diversity and human history. And it doesn't necessarily embody the sorts of humanistic values which many of us would endorse. But I think, to take the other side of the coin, the whole emphasis on global markets and has had some positive features. I mean, I think what it did, that kind of tremendous world market building of the 90s and 2000s, what it did was it put forward the idea of inclusion. Now, it put forward the idea of inclusion for purely economic reasons, because it maximizes the size of the market. But, the idea that of non-discrimination, for example, is one of the things which is inherent in that kind of global market outlook. So I think there's been some positive things. You look at the way in which global companies market their products, and they use diversity as a primary theme. And although that's superficial, it's exploitative, it's a little cynical, but it matters. It says not everyone is white, Anglo-American, male, but there's a much broader set of people out there. And that's been an important thing. But of course, it only goes so far. And I think that, to me, the notion of global citizenship, it invokes the need for us to be committed to each other, if you like, responsibility at a distance, as one geographer. I'll just get her name, just a sec.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, it invokes the idea of responsibility at a distance, which Doreen Massey talked about. And this notion that in a sense we're all committed to each other, and I think that involves an appreciation of diversity and an embrace of difference as a positive thing, as something not only as a commitment to the welfare of others, but as a way to learn, as a way to broaden our own horizons and grow. And the best thing I think about international and global education is it not only brings you into contact with an enormous range of people, and you learn a lot in that process, and you teach each other a lot, right, but also that you fundamentally change and grow as a result. And there's a lot of very good programs around the world under the heading Global Citizenship Education, which are doing exactly that.
Absolutely. And I'd like us to discuss a second question, and perhaps related question. Why, in your opinion, when it comes to the notion of global, there is a lot of contestation, particularly in higher education? Several of my guests here, international scholars, would discuss this in a perspective of local, so the importance of the interconnection of the local and the global. But when it comes to global, there is a lot of, let's say, a dynamic discussion, particularly in higher education. Why, in your opinion? What is the center of all of this?
Well, there's two strands I'd like to focus on. I mean, one is that there's a contest about global as a word. I mean, I think that it's got negative connotations for some and positive connotations, right, for others. Negative connotations are the association between the word global and global marketization and an Anglo-American domination of the world, which I think was the form that 1990s globalization took after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And if you like, the temporary end of geopolitics. Things have changed since, but the temporary end of geopolitics and the Americanization process. And I think in that context, there was a lot of pushback, especially in the colonial and post-colonial world, with people saying, no, our identity is important, our values are important, our way of life is valid. We don't have to become like this, the same as everyone else. And I think that had a lot of validity. But the word global, which was associated with the process of the rolling out of a common economy and common culture across the world, took on a negative tinge for some. But for others, of course, global has been empowering and enabling. It's been opening up doorways. It's been creating a much broader set of relationships. It's been creating mutual commitment. And it's about culture and communication and diversity, not about similarity in economics alone and so on. So, there is that permanent contest now about global. There's both negative and positive. And I think when we talk about global, we have to attach the values that we particularly associate with it. Excellent. The second point I'd like to make, I guess, about the contest around global is that global and local is not the end of the story. When the great cultural and communicative globalization that accompanied the world market rollout in the 1990s was happening, it was clear that there was a direct relationship between global forces and local activity in a new way. So people started talking about local, and this was happening because of the communicative space that we were then in. The internet appeared, suddenly we could synchronously talk to everyone around the world who was in that system, and the number of people joining that system was growing by leaps and bounds every year. So you had this process of a world community forming through the internet, and that's been tremendously important, and that created the glow-local syndrome, and so that became the rubric. But some of us in higher education were well aware, and you could say this even more about schools, I think, that the nation state had not disappeared. It was still in the picture, and the nation state was still running education systems. It was still framing higher education. You could say there's some exceptions. There's some private institutions which largely work outside government, but there's a few there's online education that works across borders, which may not be nationally regulated closely, but most education is shaped and framed by government. And it's and that's continued to be the case in the world's universities, generally speaking. So some of us felt that we had to put national back into the picture. In fact, we started to talk about glow-nacal, which is global, national, and local, glow-nacal, as a way of expressing the fact that there weren't two dimensions here, global and local, but there were three dimensions, global, national, and local. And I would say that the last 10 years or so have shown us that the national factor is very important still in human affairs. And in fact, I get the sense that the nation state is getting so much stronger now, again, as an identity, as an agency in the global environment, that global convergence and integration are under some pressure. And maybe there's growing tension, growing division within the world system. And that's a worry, I think. So global citizenship education has work to do to overcome those divisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. In a way, this ties also with the next question. And I wanted to ask you how the notion of global citizenship is related to your journey as an educator. You have an extensive experience doing research, teaching globally. And so I thought that it would be very interesting to learn a little bit of your journey of life in relation to our discussion.
I think it's always good to talk about, the biographical aspect, isn't it, of our work, because it does provide real insights into the way the world works and also the way particular bodies of work are develop. And in my case, I think, I was active in my own national political and policy environment in the earlier stages of my career, up to around about my mid-30s or a bit later. Right. That was really my whole world. And I didn't know much about the world as a whole. I was I was interested. I read a lot of history, so I knew about the world in an historical sense, but I didn't travel, and I wasn't working in international programs. And well, some of us were around me. And then things happened to me that changed it for me. And I mean, the two things that happened were, one, I got married to someone from another country. That's important, you know, and someone who didn't speak my language as a first language. And that was really helpful, I guess, in my own development in making me realize a little bit more about culture and society. And I began to understand that my English language Anglophone culture was not reality. It was just one culture among many.
Right.
And that was such an important insight, wasn't it? Isn't it? You know, learning that is so helpful. It's something which migrants understand, and bilingual people, multilingual people, of course, understand very well. But most of us who start from monolingual backgrounds don't understand until we're shaken up and things change. And of course, when you fall in love with someone from another country, that shakes you up and changes you, and that's very good for you.
Which country specifically?
I was in Philippines in my case.
Okay.
And the other thing that happened was I had a very good friend who was actually from a Pakistani Muslim family, but they immigrated to Australia. And so he's Indian, not from Pakistan, but from the part that became Pakistan later. They originally started from India. And he identified as, and still does, as Indian, actually, rather than Pakistani. And he was you know, was a good friend, and he recruited me to a university centre which was working on international education, you know, working with international students, intercultural education, also teaching managers and academic developers about internationalization, that sort of thing. So I started to work on globalization as a research topic and as a teaching field. And I didn't know much about it. And I had this extraordinary first couple of years where I read a lot of literature and discovered how exciting it was. And this was around about 1999, 2000, you know, when things were still pretty pro-global, if you like, without too many. And this was before 9/11, you know, before the Twin Towers bombing, and at that stage it was all no systems go for globalization, wasn't it? Certainly both culturally and economically. So I got into it at the positive stage, and then of course acquired a lot of critical understanding of it as well myself. But the long and the short of it is I got really fascinated by international stuff, and from then on that became the main thing that I did in higher education studies. And subsequently I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia and East Asia doing research on university development there. I went to Latin America. I had a good colleague in Argentina, another one in Mexico, and we wrote together. I started going to the US as well, which of course is actually a very diverse country in many ways. And all these debates were being discussed in the US a lot. And then I, of course, started going to Europe. I eventually moved to Europe and to work in London and then at Oxford. So I've sort of had the chance to get to know a bit more about Western Europe, which is really interesting in terms of culture and diversity, as well as maintaining a strong interest in East and Southeast Asia. And I've got a growing interest in South Asia. So, you know, I mean, all of these things have been professional, I guess, but they become personal as well. And I think the driver was that, you know, that original step into a cross-cultural relationship, and how important that was personally in opening my mind.
Interesting dynamic combination. Very, very interesting. And based on this, I'd like to ask you another question. You've been developing a lot of research work. So let's talk about your forthcoming project and recent publications in terms of how they connect with our discussion today. It would be nice if you could discuss core projects, something that you are developing at the moment is particularly relevant to our discussion, because I'm confident that would help our audience to develop an holistic understanding of this on this very important discussion we are having today.
Well, if we use global as a positive idea, then I would say that a commitment to global education means a commitment to improvement of education throughout the world, and you know, that's one of the normative things that it carries with it, and you know, a belief in what education can bring, At one end, it's emancipatory. At other end, it's just about personal development and growth, and that's really important too. And it's something which is good for individuals and good for groups and societies. Now, we would want to see that central human process of education happening well everywhere, and I think that's what my commitment to global education has become. Now, I haven't been able to work everywhere, of course, and it takes a long time to get to really understand any national or local context well. In the last few years, I've worked on a number of different projects, but the things I'd mention, I guess, here would be, firstly, we've just completed a book called Changing Higher Education in India, where I work with colleagues in Delhi, based at two different universities there, on the issues facing Indian higher education in the foreseeable future. And India's just gone through a big process of looking at its higher education system, and it's developed a new higher education policy framework, which actually came into place just before the pandemic. And our book has come out in the slipstream of that discussion, so it's been good timing. But you realise this is such an important country, India. I think that the last 10 years have been the rise of the middle powers. Brazil, India, Iran, countries, South Korea. Countries which are becoming really important countries in their own right, and influences in the world, and influenced by Western modernisation, but quite independent of it as well, and having their own path, if you like. Now, India, of course, of all those countries, I've left out China because China's a bigger fish. China's so important now that it's half the world. But and I'll come to China in a minute. But I mean, India is a really important country, and long term, it's a demographic, giant, and it's full of educated and smart people now. And in the future, we'll have even more. But the challenges in India, the challenges of food and water and the environment, and the challenges of industrial development in an ecologically responsible way, the challenges of modernisation in these great cities, that India has, and urbanisation as a process is quite disruptive in many ways. And there's a long way to go with urbanisation, because it's only about 1/3 of the population living in cities in India, where at the world as a whole, it's almost 60%. So you can see India is going through an enormous development process.
Absolutely.
And higher education's challenges are, there's no system more complex, more diverse, larger really than India, and the material and organizational issues are enormous, and it's as important, as complex as the rest of the world put together, really, if you look at it as a higher education system. So we only scratch the surface of the challenges, but I think that our book has been really helpful in opening up some issues and for further discussion, and drawing good people into the discussion to contribute to national policy development. The other book project I've worked on, which is also completed, is Changing Higher Education in East Asia.
East Asia.
Yeah, and there the story is a little bit more positive, in the sense that, Singapore, China, South Korea, and before that, Japan, have made immense, progress in terms of education and knowledge. And in many respects, this is the strongest education zone in the world. It's tremendous commitment to Confucian learning in the home, in the family, really underpins a very well-educated and educatable population. And, as is shown by the OECD PISA results, where East Asia completely streets it. They in maths, I think the top 8 systems are all in East Asia, and in reading and science, they also do really well. And even Vietnam, which is much poorer than the others I've named, also has a very strong educational culture. So these were the countries which we wrote about, and their problems are, of course, because they're still developing and emerging and massifying, and and dealing with all the contradictions of trying to form strong elite universities at the same time as build mass education of high quality, and so on, and trying to do it all at once and very fast. But they've also got the fundamental issue of Westernization and Western modernization, and how that challenges but also enriches their educational and social culture. And what does it mean to be Chinese or Chinese civilizational in relation to the West now? I mean, is a more independent, more autonomous culture emerging? What form will that take? What will that bring to the world as a whole? What does a Japanese or Chinese or South Korean globalization look like, and how's that different to an American globalization or a German globalization? So these issues are all sort of emerging and being developed. But one of the nice things about East Asia is that there's this tremendous understanding of the global citizenship idea. You take a place like South Korea, it's a tremendous discussion there, really important there. And in China too, there are a lot of centers and programs, school and higher education, devoted to the idea of global citizenship. I've got a colleague, doctoral student at Oxford, who's doing a brilliant PhD study of global citizenship education.
Interesting. Yeah. Why, in your opinion, countries such as South Korea and China are focusing to that extent on the notion of global citizenship, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's some cultural roots to this, and it's long-standing. If you go back to the Zhao dynasty in China, it was so important, the Western Zhao, in shaping Chinese outlook on all questions about governance, education, and culture and society. Now, the idea of qianxia is the idea of a large worldwide relational environment. That we are in families, we are in villages, we are in provinces, we are in nations, and we are in qianxia, which is the largest concept. There's nothing really in Western thinking which is quite the equivalent of this. I mean, when we talk about the world as a whole, no one really notices, but in classical Western culture, it's all about nation states. But in qianxia idea, deep in Chinese culture, and it came first. It came before the idea of the nation state, and it was the Qin dynasty about 1,000 years later, in 200 BCE or thereabouts, which develops the nation state principle. And it's the first nation state is in China, really, and that formula, qianxia, the world as a whole, and the nation state, then became replicated in Korea and in Japan in this next 1,000 years. So that's this basic outlook of a system, a political and social system, which has a concept of a world as a whole, the world as a whole, as well as the nation state, is very East Asian, very Chinese civilizational. And so I think that
interesting,
an instinct, a sort of cultural value there about that the global citizenship level, which is easy in East Asia in a way which it isn't in most other parts of the world. So people go straight to it quite quickly.
Interesting. And before we move on with the last question for our conversation dialogue today, I want to ask you to briefly mention the importance of the Center for Global Higher Education. I know that there is an important conference at the center coming up, but more in general, if you could share 2 or 3 core areas that are core for the Center for Global Higher Education, which, by the way, does very interesting research on all these areas that we covered today: globalization, higher education, global education. It would be interesting, I believe, to our audience to learn a little bit about the center. Of course, then we will put all the link into the YouTube interview once it's published.
Well, Centre for Global Higher Education was funded in its wisdom by the British government, which said that we should have a dedicated research group, which for a period of time will look at the future of higher education, where it's going, how to optimize it, how to make it better. And we'll do that not just nationally, but also in an international and comparative context. So we put up a proposal for such a centre, and we were supported. And as a result, we were endowed with I think relatively generous funding for 8 years. Over an 8-year period. We had to renew after 5, and we did. And our mandate is to carry out projects, research projects over this period of time, most of them 5 or 6 years in length, some shorter, which is looking at global, national, and local aspects of universities, colleges, institutes around the world, and include in that the research mission and the science aspects. Which were also part of our brief. So we've got a number of projects, and in fact, we've had, I think, over our time, about 17 altogether, of which 10 are currently operational. Some have finished. And I mean, for example, we're looking at student learning in the STEM disciplines, in the physical sciences and maths, and comparing student learning in engineering, which is an applied field, which is about professional practice,
Right.
with student learning in the core discipline of chemistry. And we're doing that in 3 different countries. And what we want to get to grips with here is how their education changes students and how that might be different from country to country. So that's one of the things we're doing on the learning side. Another project we've got is we're looking at the role of research in universities. Research is, for faculty, of course, is a very important issue. It's often the thing which decides their careers, what they do in research. But, research is, of course, central to learning. What we research, we also teach to our students. And it's a crucial part of the contribution that universities and similar institutions make to the world as a whole. So we're looking at the research mission and its strengthening and its evaluation and improvement in about 6 different countries and comparing that.
Yeah.
And I guess out of that, we'll try and draw best practice ideas which can be percolated everywhere. Another thing we're looking at is we're looking beyond market type concepts of education and looking at the role of universities and similar institutions in the public good, in relation to the public good, and not only the national public good, but the global public good. And we're looking at the way 10 different countries approach this, how they try and fashion their university systems and their activities so that they do more than just produce benefits for graduates as individuals. They do something for society as a whole and for the world as a whole. And what we're finding there is that across the 10 countries we're comparing, they approach this problem very differently. Some do a lot more about it than others. You might say that just, looking at global citizenship, some educators focus a lot more on it than others. Others don't focus on it at all. For some, it's the most important thing. Well, it's the same with this, questions about public good and global public good. I mean, some see it as really central to some countries see it as really central, and others see it as a marginal issue. So I'd say that in the English-speaking world, it's fairly marginal. We talk about collaborative research programs on big problems like climate change.
Right.
We don't talk about much more about the public good. We mostly focus on benefits for individual graduates, whereas in, say, Finland, which is one of our studies, the public good question permeates the mission of universities. And in China, Korea, and Japan, it's different again. I mean, it's an important part of things, but it's not the whole of things. So, it's sort of, there are multiple missions, and the graduate employment mission is very important, but so is the public good. So, and a lot of that's expressed through work for government in China, whereas in Korea, it's expressed more in civil society. So, you get these different nuances. And I think out of that, we want to devise a set of proposals on how higher education everywhere can commit better and complete its work better for the public good.
Yeah, there is this ethical values-based dimension that in a way connects with your discussion, which is very interesting. And perhaps we can discuss that again in the future. But I want to conclude this very interesting and dynamic conversation with you, Simon, with the core question. And the question is a challenging one. How would you define global citizenship and the educational pedagogical dimensions of global citizenship education using 3 keywords, and why these 3 keywords?
That is a challenging question, because I think whenever we're asked to get things down to a very small number of words, that really forces us to concentrate on what's important, doesn't it? And what's essential. Yeah. Okay, I'd say my first word would be other. Right? Learning from the other, learning through the other,
with a capital O, perhaps.
That's probably 3. Learning through the other is 4 words, isn't it? I would say that's my central principle about intercultural and global higher education. Now, it's about learning through the other. It's seeing through the eyes of the other, and I think it's there when we start entering the imaginative world of someone else, we start to understand the world as they see it. Then we start to get to grips with how diverse we are, what we have in common, what we need to understand to work and live together, what we need to understand to cooperate to solve common problems. It's that imaginative capacity to enter into the mind of the other that I think is the best thing we can do in global and intercultural education. Now, you wanted 3 words. I gave you learning through the other. That's 4. Or is other our first word and we've got 2 more to go? You tell me.
I believe that seeing the precious experience and the precious discussion that we are having today, 2 other keywords will be beneficial to everyone, if you wish. And
okay, here's a second word. A second word.
Okay.
Is respect.
Respect.
Respect. Yeah, it's really important. This is absolutely central. I mean, if you go into relationships with someone from another country or another culture thinking, I've got things to teach you, you need my help, I'm superior to you, my culture's better. And I think this is the assumption which Western thinkers have taken into their relationships with the rest of the world for the last 200 years of Euro-American dominance. You know, it's been it's the colonial era, the classic colonial problem. The colonizer is trapped as much as the colonized. You know, the colonizer can't understand that their culture is only one of many, that they've got something to learn from someone else.
Yeah. And
they have got something to teach, of course, as well. You know, both. You've got mutual learning. I think mutual respect is really, really important. And people know, you know, if it's there or not. And if it's there, they have a good relationship with each other. And if it's not there, they don't. And it's always a matter of then trying to change the relationship and into a mutual one. And that can involve conflict, pushback, you know, and then we're into another domain of problems around conflict. So I'd say that the other and respect, and the third word I'd use is agency.
Agency.
Now, agency is about, you know, the power that we all have as individuals and our institutions have, our organizations have. It's about the capacity to act and they act confidently. And I think that, you know, you look at the history of development programs, Western development programs as they've been Western financed, and they haven't always succeeded. In fact, most of them have been unsuccessful largely in achieving their objectives. Some have succeeded. And the ones that have succeeded are the ones which have built the capacity in a local domain, and essentially the local domain has taken over and run the program and gone on with it after the money has stopped too. So it's left some permanent feature, which has been an addition, a positive addition to the environment. So, you know, a development program which says, we've got the blueprint, this is how you run, you know, you modernize yourself successfully, just have to work hard according to our set of rules and our set of proposals, and it'll all be okay. I mean, that never works. What does work is that you build the confidence and capability, and you contribute. And even that process is something which has to come from within the agent. And all the builder can do is essentially help with resourcing that process. And that's really important. And I think that, you know, that it's as like parenting, you know, those who hold the resources, if you like, in the dominant position initially, and they withdraw. But I think that the process of withdrawal has to be more rapid than with parenting, where there's a process of biological maturation involved.
Yeah.
You know, it's really important to build agency. Nothing else matters in development. And so I think that, you know, the world is unequal. You know, mutual respect, cultural respect, absolutely central. But of course, there's inequality. And of course, some people have got more resources than others. And yes, they should make those resources more broadly available. But to do that effectively, they have to build agency, not just, if you like, step in with their own set of rules and try and implement those.
Absolutely. So we have learning through the other, mutual respect, and agency as the 3 key words.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, it was a very interesting, rich, and insightful conversation, Simon, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Pleasure, Emiliano. It's been really good to talk with you.
Thank you.